South Africa. Just the name itself brings up a whole mix of images, hey? Nelson Mandela, the 2010 World Cup with its vuvuzelas buzzing like a billion angry bees. Maybe even a lekker braai with chops and Boer sizzling away. We call ourselves the Rainbow Nation, a beautiful idea of different people coming together after a long, dark history. But like any family, especially a big, complicated one that was forced together, there's always a bit of a squabble over who gets to hold the remote control. The story of who runs South Africa isn't a simple one. It's a proper drama series with plot twists, new villains and old heroes trying to find their way in a world that keeps changing the rules. It's a tale of power, who has it, who lost it, and who's trying to grab it in new, sneaky ways. The question of who's in control has been the central theme of our country's story for centuries. For a long, long time, the answer was brutally simple. A small white minority was in charge, and everyone else just had to live with it. This wasn't just an unspoken rule, it was written into the law, carved into the very landscape of the country. Then, in 1994, the script was flipped. The liberation heroes, the African National Congress, took over, promising a new beginning for all. It was a miracle, a moment of pure magic. But as anyone who's ever been in a long-term relationship knows, the honeymoon period doesn't last forever. The struggle for control didn't end, it just changed its clothes and found new battlegrounds. Today, in 2025, that struggle is more complex than ever before. It's not just about black and white anymore. Now the fight for control is happening in our government offices, in the boardrooms of massive corporations, and even in the invisible world of the internet and digital data. It involves powerful countries from across the ocean, like China and the United States, who see South Africa as a key player in their own global chess game. They're all pulling strings, making deals, and trying to shape our future to suit their own needs. It's like everyone wants a piece of the South African pie, and we, the people, are left wondering if there will be any crumbs left for us. So, to really understand who holds the power in South Africa today, we have to take a trip back in time. We need to look at how the old bosses got the keys to the country, how the new bosses took over, and what challenges they've been tripping over ever since. We'll look at the obvious power of politics and the hidden power of technology. It's a story about freedom, inequality, and the tough, ongoing mission to build a nation that truly belongs to all its people. It's a complicated, sometimes frustrating, but always fascinating story. So grab a cup of rooibos tea, get comfy, and let's unpack this thing. Let's wind the clock back to 1948. The world was still cleaning up after World War II, but in South Africa, a different kind of war was just beginning. This was the year the National Party, or NP, came into power. Now this wasn't just any political party. The NP was formed way back in 1914 with a very specific mission: to protect and promote the interests of Afrikaners, the white South Africans mainly of Dutch descent. They felt like they were losing their culture and power to the English-speaking whites, and they were determined to take control. When they won the election, they didn't just plan to govern, they planned to completely re-engineer the country to guarantee their power forever. This was the beginning of what you could call a political hijacking, and it was done in broad daylight. The NP's master plan had a name: Apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word that literally means apartness, and that's exactly what it was. It was a system designed to separate people based on race, not just socially, but legally and geographically. The whole idea was to ensure that the white minority, which was less than 20% of the population, would have 100% of the power and most of the wealth. They created a whole set of laws to make this happen. They classified every single person as white, colored, Indian, or black. This classification would determine where you could live, what job you could have, who you could marry, and even which park bench you could sit on. It was racial segregation on steroids. This wasn't just about controlling people's daily lives, it was about controlling the land itself. The government passed laws like the Group Areas Act, which carved up cities and towns into racial zones. If you were black and living in an area that was suddenly declared white, you were forced to move. Communities that had existed for generations were bulldozed to the ground. The most infamous example is District 6 in Cape Town. Furthermore, the Land Acts reserved over 80% of the country's land for the white minority. Black South Africans were pushed into so-called homelands or Bantustans, which were small, impoverished territories that were basically rural ghettos. They took away citizenship and made people foreigners in the land of their birth. The National Party held on to this power for nearly 50 years, not because people liked their policies, but through sheer force. They built up a massive police and military force to crush any opposition. Laws like the Suppression of Communism Act were used to ban political parties, silence activists, and throw people in jail without a trial. People who fought back were labeled as terrorists. This was a government that ruled through fear, creating a society where a small group of people had absolute control over the lives, the land, and the future of millions. It was a system built to last, and it would take a monumental struggle to bring it down. Imagine waking up one day and being told that the place you call home is no longer yours. That's what apartheid did. The system wasn't just a set of abstract political ideas, it crashed into people's lives every single day. For Black South Africans, life became a maze of permits and restrictions. To work in a white city, you needed a passbook or dampas. Forgetting it at home or having the wrong stamp could land you in jail. It was a way of controlling movement, turning citizens into temporary visitors who could be kicked out at any moment. This system was designed to make people feel powerless, to remind them constantly of their place in the hierarchy. It was a psychological war as much as a political one. Education was another powerful tool of control. The Bantu Education Act was created with the explicit goal of teaching black children just enough to be useful laborers, but not enough to challenge the system. Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, famously said that there was no place for the Bantu in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. So, schools for black children were deliberately underfunded, with overcrowded classrooms and poorly trained teachers. The goal was to trap generations in a cycle of poverty and servitude, ensuring a steady supply of cheap workers for the mines and farms that made the white economy rich. It was a calculated plan to rob people of their potential. The division was everywhere. You saw it in the separate entrances for post offices, the separate queues at the bank, and the separate and always inferior hospitals and ambulances. You couldn't share a beach, a bus, or a park bench. Love across the color line was a crime under the Immorality Act. These laws were designed to make racial separation feel natural and permanent. They prevented people from forming basic human connections, from seeing each other as just people. By keeping everyone apart, the government could more easily promote fear and mistrust, making it harder for different groups to unite against their common oppressor. The system thrived on keeping people divided, and of course, there was the land. The forced removals under the Group Areas Act tore families and communities apart. Places like Sophiatown in Johannesburg, a vibrant hub of black culture, music, and intellectual life, were flattened by bulldozers to make way for a new white suburb called Triumph, which is Afrikaans for triumph. The name itself was a slap in the face. Millions of people were stripped of their homes and their history and dumped in dusty remote townships, often far from jobs and opportunities. This wasn't just about moving people, it was about erasing their presence from the most valuable parts of the country, rewriting the map to reflect the ideology of white supremacy. For decades, it seemed like the National Party's grip on power was unbreakable. But underneath the surface of oppression, resistance was always simmering. The African National Congress, formed way back in 1912, became the main voice of the struggle. For years, they tried peaceful protests, but after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where police shot and killed 69 peaceful protesters, they realized that nonviolence alone wasn't working. The ANC was banned, and its leaders, including a young lawyer named Nelson Mandela, were forced to go underground or into exile. They formed an armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, and the struggle intensified both inside and outside the country. The fight against apartheid became a global cause. International pressure started to build. Countries imposed economic sanctions, famous musicians refused to play in Sun City, and sports teams were banned from international competitions like the Olympics and the Rugby World Cup. This isolation hurt the apartheid government badly. Inside South Africa, the townships were on fire. Young people, who had nothing to lose, led the charge with student uprisings like the Soweto Uprising of 1976. The pressure was coming from all sides, and by the late 1980s, even the NP government started to see that the system was unsustainable. The country was becoming ungovernable. The turning point came in 1990. The new president, F.W. de Klerk, stunned the world by unbanning the ANC and other liberation movements, and announcing the release of Nelson Mandela from prison after 27 long years. It was a moment of unbelievable hope. The next 4 years were a tense and difficult period of negotiations. There was a lot of violence and fear that the country would fall into a full-blown civil war. But somehow, through the leadership of Mandela and others, a deal was hammered out. A new democratic constitution was written, one of the most progressive in the world, guaranteeing equal rights for all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or sexuality. Then came 27 April 1994, a day etched into the heart of every South African. For the first time ever, every citizen, of every color, was allowed to vote. Long queues of people snaked for kilometers, waiting patiently for hours to cast their ballot. Old men and women who had lived their entire lives as second-class citizens finally had a say in their own future. It was a powerful, emotional, and miraculous day. The ANC won the election by a landslide, and Nelson Mandela became the first democratically elected president of South Africa. The control of the country had officially and peacefully been handed over. The long walk to freedom had reached a major milestone. Winning the election in 1994 was like, winning the World Cup. It was a massive victory, a moment of pure joy and celebration for the majority of the country. The ANC government came into power with a huge task ahead of them, to undo the damage of 50 years of apartheid and build a new, fair society. They had a lot of goodwill, both at home and around the world. They started by rolling out essential services to millions of people who had been ignored by the old government. Houses were built, electricity was connected to townships, and clean water was brought to rural villages. For the first time, the government was working for all its people. But dismantling a system as deeply entrenched as apartheid is not like flipping a switch. The political power had changed hands, but the economic power was a different story. The wealth of the country, the mines, the big farms, the major corporations, the banks, was still overwhelmingly in the hands of the white minority. Apartheid had created one of the most unequal societies on earth, and that gap between the rich and the poor didn't just disappear overnight. This massive inequality has been the biggest challenge for the new South Africa. While a new black middle class has emerged, millions of people are still stuck in poverty, living in the same townships their parents and grandparents were forced into. This economic inequality creates a whole host of other problems. Unemployment is incredibly high, especially among young people. When people don't have jobs or opportunities, they get frustrated and angry. This leads to high crime rates and social instability. The government has tried to address this with policies like Black Economic Empowerment, or BE, which aims to give black South Africans a bigger stake in the economy. But these policies have had mixed results. Sometimes they have been criticized for only benefiting a small, politically connected elite, creating a new class of so-called tenderpreneurs who get rich from government contracts, while the masses are left behind. So, while the ANC has had political control for over 30 years, the ghost of apartheid still haunts the country. The social and economic structures that were built over decades are incredibly hard to break down. The geography of our cities still reflects the old racial divisions. The quality of education for a child in a poor township is still worlds away from that of a child in a wealthy suburb. This is the ongoing struggle. The fight is no longer against racist laws but against their lingering legacy. It's a fight for economic freedom and true equality, and it's proving to be just as tough as the fight for political freedom was. Just as South Africa was getting to grips with its old demons, a new kind of power struggle began to emerge. One that's a lot less visible than the old signs on park benches. This new battle is being fought in the world of technology, and, a major new player has entered the game: China. Over the last decade or so, Chinese companies have become deeply embedded in South Africa's digital infrastructure. It's a form of control that doesn't use police vans or passbooks. It uses fiber optic cables, surveillance cameras, and data centers. It's a quiet, creeping takeover that most people don't even notice is happening. Think about your mobile phone. There's a very good chance that the network it runs on is powered by Chinese technology. Companies like Huawei have built and now maintain the core infrastructure for major South African mobile networks like Telkom, MTN, and Rain. They provide the hardware that makes our calls and internet work. This isn't just a business deal, it gives them enormous influence. Beyond our phones, Chinese tech is also watching over our cities. Huawei's Safe City projects have installed thousands of surveillance cameras in cities like Johannesburg, all linked to central command centers. While the official line is that this is for fighting crime, It also creates a massive surveillance network. The control goes even deeper. The South African government's own data is increasingly being managed by Chinese companies. Alibaba Cloud, the tech giant's cloud computing arm, now hosts critical government databases. This means that sensitive information about citizens and state operations is stored on servers managed by a foreign power. Chinese firms are effectively running the digital spine of the South African state. This level of integration raises serious questions about data security and national sovereignty. Who has access to all this information, and what could they do with it? It's a new form of dependency that puts a huge amount of power in the hands of Beijing. This isn't happening by accident. It's part of China's broader strategy to expand its influence across Africa through its Belt and Road Initiative. By providing loans, building infrastructure, and embedding its technology, China is creating a network of friendly and often indebted nations. For a country like South Africa, which needs investment and development, the offer of advanced technology and easy financing is very attractive. But it comes with strings attached. This growing reliance on Chinese technology makes it harder for South Africa to act independently, creating a new subtle form of control in the 21st century. The new technological power struggle in South Africa became crystal clear with a very strange decision made in late 2023. The government decided to ban Starlink. Now, for those who don't know, Starlink is a satellite internet service from Elon Musk's company, SpaceX. It promises to bring fast, reliable internet to even the most remote corners of the world. For a country like South Africa, with vast rural areas that have little to no internet access, this seems like a no-brainer, right? A game changer for schools, clinics, and businesses. But instead of welcoming it, the government said no thanks and started confiscating the satellite dishes, even at gunpoint. The official reason for the ban was a bit of a bureaucratic tangle. The government said Starlink didn't have the right licenses and, more importantly, didn't comply with a law that requires telecommunications companies to have at least 30% Black South African ownership. Elon Musk, never one to be quiet, publicly complained, suggesting the real reason was because he's not black. While the ownership rule is on the books, many people felt it was being used as a convenient excuse to block a technology that threatened the established order. It looked less like a regulatory issue and more like a political move to protect certain interests. So, whose interests were being protected? Many observers pointed their fingers straight at China. Starlink offers something unique and, for some, dangerous: an independent, encrypted internet connection that completely bypasses the country's existing infrastructure. Remember that digital spine built and managed by Chinese companies like Huawei? Starlink flies right over it. This means the government and its Chinese tech partners would have no way to monitor or control the data flowing through Starlink's network. In a world where information is power, giving people an uncontrollable channel to the internet is a big deal for those who like to keep an eye on things. The ban had real-world consequences, especially for groups who were already using Starlink in its early access phase. Conservation groups like the Eco Defense Group, which were using the service for their anti-poaching operations in remote bushveld areas, were suddenly cut off. They became collateral damage in what some have called a data Cold War being fought on South African soil between the US and China. The Starlink saga showed everyone that the battle for control in South Africa is no longer just about land and votes, it's about who controls the flow of information and the digital highways of the future. Just when you thought the plot couldn't get any thicker, another global superpower decided to jump into the South African drama: the United States. In early and mid-2025, relations between the US and South Africa, which had been a bit chilly for a while, dropped to what experts called unprecedentedly low levels. The Trump administration in the White House started publicly criticizing the South African government, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa. President Trump accused the administration of being out of control and made explosive claims about a supposed genocide against white Afrikaner South Africans, pointing to farm murders and land expropriation policies. This was a major escalation. It's one thing for countries to disagree behind closed doors, but it's another thing entirely for the President of the United States to publicly condemn the South African government in such strong terms. Secretary of State Marco Rubio backed up these claims, putting the full weight of the US government behind them. This put the Ramaphosa government in a very difficult position. A meeting was even scheduled between the two presidents in May 2025, creating a high-stakes diplomatic showdown. The US was no longer just a distant partner, It was actively intervening and challenging the legitimacy of the elected South African government on the world stage. The American intervention went beyond just words. The Trump administration took the significant step of starting to accept white South Africans as refugees. In May 2025, reports emerged that a group of 60 white South Africans had arrived in the U.S. seeking asylum, claiming they were being persecuted at home. This policy shift was a direct challenge to the South African state. It created a narrative that the U.S. was a protector of an oppressed minority group within South Africa. This move caused a stir back in the U.S. as well, with organizations like the Episcopal Church ending their long-standing refugee resettlement partnership with the federal government in protest. This new pressure from the U.S. adds another complicated layer to the question of who controls South Africa. The government now finds itself caught in a tug-of-war between two global giants. On one side you have China, offering technology and infrastructure deals that create a kind of soft economic dependency. On the other side you have the U.S., using loud public diplomacy and refugee policies to apply direct political pressure. The South African government is trying to navigate this tricky path, maintaining its sovereignty while dealing with powerful international forces that are trying to pull the country in different directions for their own strategic reasons. So after this whole journey through history, politics, and technology, we come back to our original question: who is really in control of South Africa in 2025? The simple answer is that the African National Congress is the democratically elected government, holding the political power. But as we've seen, the real answer is so much more complicated. It's like asking who's in charge of a big, noisy family dinner. Mom might be at the head of the table, but uncle is telling loud stories, grandma is insisting everyone eats more, and the kids are secretly playing games on their phones under the table. Everyone has some influence and no one has total control. The ANC government holds the official levers of power, but they are wrestling with the powerful ghost of apartheid. The economic landscape of the country, with its massive inequality and concentration of wealth, is a legacy that severely limits their ability to bring about the changes they promised. The dream of 1994 was for political freedom to lead to economic freedom for all. But for millions, that second part of the dream has not yet come true. This creates a constant internal struggle, where the government's control is challenged by social unrest, poverty, and the deep-seated frustrations of a population still waiting for a better life. At the same time, new external forces are pulling the strings. China's technological and economic influence has created a new kind of dependency, a digital colonialism that gives Beijing a powerful, behind-the-scenes say in the country's future. The U.S., with its renewed and aggressive diplomatic pressure, is also trying to steer the ship of the South African state. The government is caught in the middle, trying to balance these global superpowers off against each other without losing its own sovereignty. This international power play means that many decisions made in Pretoria are influenced by conversations happening in Beijing and Washington. Ultimately, control in South Africa is fractured and contested. It's a constant tug-of-war between the elected government, the persistent economic legacy of the past, powerful global players, and, most importantly, the people of South Africa themselves. The future of who is truly in charge will be decided in this messy, complicated arena. It will depend on whether the government can finally tackle the inequality that still divides the nation, whether it can navigate the treacherous waters of global politics, and whether ordinary South Africans can make their voices heard above the noise. The struggle for power is far from over. It has just entered a new, more complex chapter.